As the solstice came round on Sunday, thousands of folks measured light pollution. This is a Talkin Science Story of the Week. I'm Matt Miller, you're on Trekzone.
With the latest science and space news 5 days a week across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube. This is Talkin Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
And Brad, Sunday evening for our Northern Hemisphere listeners, it was the summer solstice. For those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, the winter solstice. It marks the end of the days shortening for us, lengthening for them, and we're going to start rotating back on the axis, and a world record attempt was made.
That's exactly right. On Australia Sunday nights, starting from 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Time, there's a goal of trying to set the world record for largest online environmental sustainability lesson. And here the whole aspect was talking about and measuring light pollution, something that is a big deal in astronomy and something that we try and do a good job of controlling in Australia, but is a big impact to lots of parts of the world, not just from an astronomical standpoint, but its effects on humans and animals and all sorts of things.
Brett, tell us, what is light pollution?
Light pollution is kind of is what it seems. It's light that is polluting the skies, just as, car exhaust and CO2 emissions and, that sort of thing changes the air quality. You're talking about extra light, artificial light, changing the sky quality. Now, obviously, we have things like the sun during the daytime, so we're not really talking about daytime. Yes, we have the moon, but even the moon has a natural phase, both of lighting and movement. And it is also not nearly as bright as in the cities when you get a lot of lights going. And there's well documented cases of its effects, and that is artificial light. So, our lights on our porch or our, lights in the house with windows open, or shades open that spill out, and then they eventually go into the sky. Now, it fades over time. And so, if you're one house in the middle of the bush, you'll be seen because it'll be very dark except you, but it won't travel far. But when you have thousands and millions of people all with all these lights and all that light's going into sky, it means that there's a lot of extra artificial light, and not just volume or amount of light, but also the type or color of light, which has just as much of an impact as the volume of light. And it changes the natural process, as we'd say, with nighttime things.
One thing that I found really fascinating with this story, I was reading up on the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance website with their FAQ there, and it makes total sense, but I'd never thought of it. The impact on wildlife here is quite significant. They don't have lights, so it does affect their sleeping cycles. I was sort of losing my way there a little bit, but their sleep cycles and owls, for instance, and all this sort of stuff, there is quite an impact that humans have on the natural environment.
Exactly, especially in Australia, which has actually quite a large fraction of animals who are nocturnal, or to some degree nocturnal, that affects them, and it is well documented, well measured, and real. And people have already noticed effects with this in, say, lighter areas, so places in the Northern Hemisphere where there's a ton of light pollution in the bigger cities, about how over time these effects are starting to really weigh on some of these animals. It also affects human sleep cycle to some degree. And then there is, from my and others' aspects, the impact of astronomy, not just our ability to see scientifically, but the cultural and human changes that happen when you don't see stars or many stars in the sky. I think there's an estimated 2 billion people who have never seen the Milky Way because they live in areas that are so bright you cannot see it, and they don't really travel to places where you can see it. And that's a big deal, not even being able to see your own galaxy, where even in Canberra, even in the city, you can still see parts of the Milky Way. You get just a little outside it, and it's very bright. Not being able to see natural things in the sky, we're not talking about super dark things, we're talking about just normal things, changes your worldview.
I was watching this video on YouTube, it would have been a few weeks ago, but it was about an astronomer or an astrophotographer in America. I think he lived in Seattle, and he had to travel for 3 or 4 hours to get to a dark sky spot to photograph the Milky Way. It's something you don't sort of think about being an Australian because, as you say there, we can just go outside our nation's capital, even a couple of hours down the highway from any of our major capital cities, and be able to see the massive nighttime sky that is up there, the Milky Way, all those things, without really any aid or any massive travel plans.
Even outside your country, technically, or as you said, hours and hours to even get a somewhat decent view. And, that has a big impact. It's one thing to say, all right, well, I live in the city, but, if I travel this far or, I just pop out. So you said, even in the major cities in Australia, you don't have to travel actually that far to really see it. We're not talking about completely dark, but to really see great detail, you don't have to travel even that far out of Sydney or Brisbane. But yeah, in some parts of the U.S., like LA, for instance, you can't even see most of the stars, let alone the Milky Way.
And I guess the last one on this one, Brad, do we know if they achieved the world record?
So there was two aspects. There was people who went outside to measure their light pollution. And that was a simple visual measurement. That numbered in the tens of thousands. I think it approached 50,000 people. Well over 40,000 people who did that. For people, the key part of the record, because Guinness is a very stickler, was you had to have participate in this online environmental lesson that lasted 30 minutes. Now, it had to be exactly 30 minutes or at least 30 minutes. If it was 29 and a half minutes, it doesn't count, 28 minutes. So all that data is being processed to exactly figure out the clear part of that record, and it will take about 6 weeks to kind of get the official notice from Guinness.
And it was spearheaded here in Australia, but certainly a global project. And as we're talking about, light pollution isn't just one country's problem; it's a global problem.
That's exactly right. And especially to the animals that move and migrate and change, it is a problem for them as well.
Fantastic, Brad. Well, thanks for diving into this Talkin Science Story of the Week, and we'll have another set of 3 next week.
Take care.